Now, we've all heard of NIMBYs, the people who are opposed to housing developments in their local communities. But a new movement of YIMBYs are so desperate to get on the housing ladder, they are saying the exact opposite.
According to the Office of National Statistics, the percentage of those aged 25 to 34 who are able to buy their own home dropped from 59% in 2003-04 to just 41% in 2019-20.
Well, we're pleased to be joined by two YIMBYs now. In the studio, we have John Myers, who is the founder of the YIMBY Alliance. And we've also got YIMBY Alfie Robinson. We'll be speaking to him shortly. He's there down the line. So, John, the YIMBY Alliance, why did it happen? How did it come about? And why are you in charge?
Well, I mean, it's not about me. This is an alliance of different YIMBY groups across the country, and young people are losing hope. They're losing hope of ever owning their own home. They're giving up on the dream of having a family. And we thought it's important to get the message out to parents that if they want to have grandkids, we've got to start to fix this. As you say, the number of young people who are able to afford their own home now has dropped precipitously in just a generation. This is a huge problem, and we thought that we needed to do something about it.
And do you think people weren't doing anything? The older generation were looking after themselves, as it were, and then there was definitely a generational divide.
Well, we're trying to build bridges, not have wars with people. Yeah. And, I think there are plenty of ways for everybody to work together and to get better housing, to get better places, to build housing in a way that makes the community happier. And so there's no need to have a divide, one or the other. But there's no doubt that young people have suffered enormously, and they don't have the opportunities that their parents or their grandparents had to have a chance at home ownership.
And looking at the cost, the first-time buyer could be over, on average, £250,000, and the deposits is huge, £60,000 odd, and you're renting every month, so there isn't much money left, is there?
Exactly.
I just wondered, John, I mean, to me, housing is the ultimate supply and demand market, and at the moment, obviously, there isn't enough supply for the demand. I just wondered, lots of people seem to just focus on the supply part of it. We need more houses and never really talk about the demand bit for it. And I remember once asking a parliamentary question about how many of the new houses that were planned to be built were for people, for immigration, and it was about 2/3 of them. And I just wondered if you had a view about whether or not, actually, in order to deliver the same outcome, perhaps politicians ought to maybe focus as much on demand for housing as they do on the supply of housing.
Well, I think the demand is important, but I think what we have to remember is even if the population stopped growing, we have nowhere near enough housing for the people who are already here. And there are plenty of ways that we can build housing in a way that adds value for the community, as well as providing the homes that young people so desperately need. So I think that's the easiest way to do things. If you have some grand scheme to change property taxes or something like that, perhaps that might work. But the easiest way to do this is supply.
OK, well, we've got Alfie Robinson down the line as well, because he is a heritage consultant. And so what I'm interested in is what sort of houses or apartments are we going to be building and where, with your heritage consultant hat on? Or not this morning?
The way the planning system works squeezes development into certain interesting areas. So it determines where we do build and where we don't build. And the places that one is allowed to build, the places that are easiest to build, are often quite strange. So to give you one example, which is quite surprisingly common, is that often it's very easy to build a series of housing units that are all detached in rural areas that are next to an existing village, purely because there's less impact because there are no neighbours to that. It's in a field next to a village. Whereas doing little infill projects where you build even a very high quality structure in an urban setting is very difficult because you have lots of neighbours and you get a kind of a NIMBY pile-on of lots of people who are objecting to that. And it's seen by the planning system as being kind of high impact. But of course, with these leapfrog developments where people are reliant on cars, it is actually encroaching on the countryside, and so the outcomes are not particularly good. But the planning system as it currently stands is not necessarily very able to distinguish between those two types of project.
When I was housing minister, I was always looking at how we could build more homes because we desperately needed to. We're talking about supply and demand. And I was looking at in sort of whether it's brownfield sites, whether it was in cities, how do we do conversions, and looking at the size of a property. If somebody wants to get on the housing ladder, was there a way to make a smaller property in a big development that you could share a living room and share various other spaces? That would fit with the cost of living. It would get you on the housing ladder and prices would be much smaller. How would that fit with your sort of view on nice developments and also what you wanted to get on the property ladder?
Well, certainly I'm in favour of denser development. And this is where you have many units taking up space efficiently. If you look at a street of detached houses, which was very popular in the early 20th century, you think of the Garden City, you think of Letchworth, somewhere like that. Every little alleyway that you see between these detached houses, you add them up and you have a whole house worth of volume of empty space. And this is used to store people's bins. This doesn't create good urban spaces, and so high density developments are a great thing because they take this wasted space and they convert it into space where people can live. And yes, they are close to each other, but this gives people a chance to start on the housing ladder, but also, of course, reduces rents. And this isn't some, dense housing isn't some totally new alien invention. In the 19th century, one of the most important forms of housing was terrace houses, and people are very fond of terrace houses, particularly if they're built to a high standard.
John, can I come back to you? I would probably class myself as more of a NIMBY than a YIMBY, if I'm perfectly honest, and I seem to spend an awful lot of my time trying to stop Bradford Council from building houses over the green belt in my constituency. And I wondered whether or not NIMBYs and YIMBYs might be able to join forces, perhaps, on something, and that is about protecting the green belt, because that seems to be the bit that gets most of my constituents upset, that the sort of concreting over green fields. And most of the places where these houses are being built aren't providing affordable houses for young people to get on the housing ladder. They're massively expensive and all the rest of it. So could NIMBYs and YIMBYs join together?
Just like we have, because I'm more of a YIMBY,
exactly.
He's a NIMBY. So
could they join together and say, let's protect the green belt, but let's build more houses on brownfield sites that are affordable?
We absolutely have a no NIMBY left behind policy. The positive way forward here is, as we've heard from Alfie, to build more housing in existing urban areas. And there are lots of homeowners who are keen to be able to do more with their property. Polls, for example, show that people support residents on the street being allowed to collectively decide to allow more use of their land if they want, whether that be perhaps an extension or a granny flat or even something more ambitious. So there's lots more that we could do, bringing existing homeowners with us to allow more housing in existing towns and cities. And I think that would help to create a coalition that doesn't we don't have to fight about.
And that's why I ask about conversions now, obviously of a very high quality and, living standards. But if people aren't going to the offices, if people are saying we can work from home, there's going to be a big seismic shift of the cities. So this would bring the people back to the cities. It would have the footfall so that, the coffees and bars, the restaurants and etc. So it would fill, a criteria for so many people. So what about that? Are you, as the 20 and 30-year-olds, which is predominantly the YIMBYs, is that what you're trying to offer up, solutions and maybe a new type of city centre?
We absolutely are, and sadly I'm not 20 or 30 anymore, but we are trying to...
Most YIMBYs are,
yes, very much so. But we also...
You're lucky, John, that's the key thing, that's the important.
We have everyone from 80-year-olds down to students. It's a broad movement, and the key is we can regenerate, we can help high streets that are failing, and we can revive towns and cities by doing this sort of development.
John Myers?
And
you're just going to say something?
No,
Thank you very much indeed. I think this is one of the biggest issues facing us, is housing, is house prices. We talked about it last week, that a lot of people, young people, feel disenfranchised in a way because they can't get on the housing ladder. And there was that sort of anger towards people with wealth, and it was fundamentally coming from the whole housing issue. So thank you. May YIMBYs go from strength to strength.
And Alfie Robinson, thank you too for joining us.